Awesome. Cool. Yeah, so as Ted mentioned, my name is James, but I didn't meet you last week. I live in San Diego as well, cybersecurity engineer. I'm just trying to refresh my SQL skills and maybe level up by the end of this. We'll see. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. I tried not to overcomplicate it because it is a pretty straightforward couple of chapters, just getting introduced to SQL. But if I say something that is over your head, or it's something that you know to be incorrect, then please feel free to jump in. Yeah, so we're starting with chapter 2 or lesson 2. It's retrieving data. So this one starts off with the select statement. Which it mentions is probably going to be your most frequently used statement. From my my little exposure to SQL, I can confirm this is true. So the select statement just requires at a minimum that you specify what you want to select and from which database you want to select it. So here's an example, just to retrieve individual columns. You start with select and then the column name, which in this case is prod underscore name, and then the database that you're specifying, which in this case is products. So this is a very simple select statement, one that you would see very commonly. If you want to retrieve multiple columns, you can use the same select statement. You would just separate your column names here. For example, it says select prod underscore ID, comma, prod underscore name, comma, prod underscore price. So this is just selecting multiple columns from the products database. You can also retrieve all columns using a wildcard, which is the asterisk symbol. So when I go in and I do like a CTF or something, and I'm just trying to get all the data from a particular database, that's what I'll do, is I'll just do select star from the database that I'm targeting. If you want to retrieve distinct rows, which is going to be unique values within a column. So each column, I like to think of it as like, if you look at an Excel spreadsheet, there's individual columns which go vertically across the sheet. If you want to select individual rows, the rows that go horizontally, then you would use the select distinct statement. This will give you unique values. So if there's going to be duplicate values in those rows, then it will just give you one instance of each. And this is done using the select distinct keyword. So in this example, it's select distinct, then underscore ID, and then the database. If you want to limit your results, this is a little bit more complicated, which I did not know. I learned for the first time. Each different implementation of SQL has different keywords that you would use. So for Microsoft SQL, you would use top and then forgot to put an N. So top N. When I say N, that just is it's like a variable where you can plug in the number of results that you want to limit to. So if you want to get the top 5 results, you can go like top 5. And then you add that to the end of your select statement, and that will give you a limited number of results. For DB2, these are, sorry, I should have mentioned, these are all added to the end of your select statement. So you would do a select statement, for example, this one here, and then at the end of it, you would add in your result limiter, which is these keywords that are used here. So for DB2, you would use fetch first 5 rows only. In Oracle, you would use where row num is less than or equal to n, or whatever number you're looking for. And then for these 4, MySQL, MariaDB, PostgreSQL, SQLite, you would use the limit keyword. Some comments.
Hey, James.
Yes.
So the author said that he only threw this in just to caution people that while most of the stuff is very standard, there's some things that are, a little different for each implementation. And so just to make it a slightly more confusing, these all go at the end, but for Microsoft SQL Server, you actually have to put the top after the word select, near the very beginning of, and you can't put it at the end. It won't work there.
Got it. Perfect.
This is not something you guys need to memorize, but I think it's useful to know that when you're doing more specialized things, when you need to convert dates or do strings, substrings, like things like that, you're probably going to run into differences depending on which exact vendor's implementation you're using. But when you're doing the big things like just return these columns, return these rows, that's where everything will be exactly the same.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, that section definitely was like, oh, this will be fun working with different databases. So that's something to keep in mind. And then for adding in comments, which if this is like your first programming language, comments are really important for you to know what you're doing, and for other people that look at this code to understand what's going on as well. One great thing that I heard in reference to comments was that people think that comments explain code to the user, but it should be like code explains comments to the computer. So your comments should really be thorough if you have the time for that. So for comments in SQL, inline comments are created using the dash or the hash symbol, and it mentioned in the book that the hash was less supported, so I don't have any more specifics on that. But multiple line comments can be created between the / and asterisk. So like here, you would start it with a / and asterisk, add in your comment, and then close it off with the asterisk /. Some notes from the chapter. Unless data is sorted specifically, the data will be returned in no order of significance. I actually remember we talked about this a little bit last week. The data is just kind of returned out of order unless you sort it specifically, which is which we'll go into in the next chapter. It's just arbitrary. So yeah, multiple statements need to be separated by semicolons. So if you want to select data, you would terminate it with this semicolon here, and then you go into making your next SQL statement. And then you would, if you need to do another one, you'd separate it by semicolon as well. The SQL language itself is case insensitive. So for example, like the all caps select is the same as _ select. But as a best practice, I'm sure you would want to still use, all caps, but it is possible to use like a all _ or all lowercase, excuse me, select statement. And then it also mentioned that tables, columns, and values may not be case insensitive, just depending on which database management system you're using and the configuration of it. White space also is ignored in the SQL statements. So yeah, that was chapter 2. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts from that chapter?
All right, so people, I'm going to make a comment and see if that gives people another minute to think about if they have any questions. But historically, SQL was used to fetch information out of the database, and there was always another layer that was the presentation layer between the data and what a user would see on a screen or in a report or whatever. And so, like historically, it's not that important what order the columns come back, because ultimately some code is going to process that data, and it's not necessarily going to show it in whatever order that you do. So for example, one of the things that I sometimes would like to do when I'm just running some queries and like maybe looking at the data, this isn't like, something that I'm writing like, for a program. I'm just like, looking at some data, right? I might want to say like, well, show me this column and that column. They happen to be like, column 15 and column 30, but they're the ones I'm really interested in. So I'd like you to show me them in the beginning and say, for example, then the rest of the columns. There's no easy way to do that in SQL. And so what I ended up doing is show me this column, that column, comma, star, which means that those columns are actually repeated. They appear twice in there. And it's kind of silly to have them in there twice, but there isn't a lot of support in the language for certain things that you might think are like reasonable things that people would want, because it's always been sort of perceived as this is the thing that's hidden behind other stuff. So we don't really need stuff like that. So even though you can specify the columns in the order that you want, it it was never like, that's like an example of something that was never particularly emphasized in terms of, let's make the syntax better, let's make things easy. Like, there's no way to say, select all the columns that begin with, you know, XYZ, right? Let's say your table has 10 columns that are state underscore something and 10 columns that are city underscore something. There's no way you could say, give me all of the state underscore columns, you know, or anything even remotely like that. So in case you're wondering, like, that's sort of the historical bias, why the language is kind of frugal in terms of the kinds of things that it lets you do. It's often expecting that your front end is going to do some of that heavy lifting for you. All right, I bought some time. Anybody have any questions, thoughts? All right, cool.
Alrighty. So chapter 3, I realized I didn't put any screenshots in, so I'm just gonna have my Kindle book up here to show you guys some examples as well. Yeah, so chapter 3 is sorting data. This is something that can be done pretty easily just using the order by keyword. And this should be the last statement or the last clause in your statement rather. So for example, here you can see this is the select statement, and then you would do select the column and then from the database, and then you order it by, I mean, it's the only column you selected, but you would do order by column name. That's the example there. You can also sort by multiple columns. So the example that it gave in the book was if there are multiple employees in your employee database and they all have the same last name, you can do an order by, and then what you would do is order by and then separate the columns with a comma. So you would do order by and then first column, comma, second column. So example here. Actually, this is for products, but so you would select the data from multiple columns here from the products database, and then you would order it by first product price and then product name. So you can see the order here. Yeah, example there. You can also sort by column position. So each column will, will have a number within the database. So rather than referencing the column by name, you would just reference it by the column number. So for example, you can order by 2, 3. It only mentions this. It says that you can save time because you don't have to retype column names. But the big downside and the reason why you typically wouldn't want to use it is that you could specify an incorrect column, not the one that you're looking for. And then the last part of this chapter is specifying the sort direction. So by default, when you sort a column, it comes in descending order. So from the highest number of values down to the lowest number at the bottom. Excuse me, it's in ascending order. So by default, so it would be the lowest number to the highest number at the bottom. But if you want to flip that, you can do order by column name, and then you would put the DESC keyword at the end. You can also put the full word descending. It's also the same keyword, but the typical use is just using DESC. It applies only to the column name directly in front of it. So if you sort by multiple columns, it's just going to do the descending order for the column that you specify. Yeah, and that was a pretty short chapter for sorting data. Any questions on that? Or comments? Did you guys enjoy it?
Yeah, that was a good summary. So there's a question in the chat. So James, if you send me the doc, I will add a link to it to our GitHub repo.
Okay. Yeah.
So I have a few comments about sorting. So the default is ascending, so you don't ever need to say ascending. But if you want to, you can. So just like DESC is the common abbreviation for descending, ASC, 3 letters, is the common abbreviation for ascending. And I sometimes do that if I have something where, let's say I have 4 columns and I'm sorting 2 of them descending and 2 of them ascending, like yeah, exactly. Be as explicit as possible. Thanks, Ian. So then by putting ASC after some and DESC after the others, it's very clear that I didn't omit a DESC, that I intentionally said ascending for this one, descending for that one. And it's just a little bit clear that I didn't perhaps miss it. If I have one descending, then usually I don't bother. I just leave them all naked, which defaults to ascending, and then I have one. The other thing I'll say is that in my personal style guide, I do not ever use the sorting by column position in production code. I use it if I'm just doing one-off EDA and playing around, and it's code that's never going to be used again. But I completely, totally have done the thing where I'll write a query and it's return month, day, and then some other data. And I'll say sort by 1, 2. And then I'll change the query to say select year, month, day. And now it's not sorting by month and day, it's sorting by year and month, whatever, which maybe that's what I want, maybe it's not what I want. But like the fact that as soon as you just, change the columns in your select list, that all of a sudden your sorting is going to change is generally unintended behavior. So, so my personal style guide, I don't ever do that.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to commenting, or what Ian says, just be explicit as possible. So if you look at the code later, it's going to be almost impossible to tell like what 2, 3 is, that kind of thing. So
yeah, yes. Where I use it just as a quick and dirty shorthand in my, one-off code is, we haven't gotten to it yet, but I will have, instead of just a simple column name, I'll have an expression. And so let's say it's this giant case statement with 8 different cases and whatever. I don't want to paste all of that in the order by. I can just say column 3. And then that tells it that whole big long thing that you said that was, the third thing that you're returning. So that's mostly when I just get lazy and say, yeah, this is a little more convenient.
So Ted, are you saying that you would do that for production code?
No.
So for production code, you wouldn't use ordering. You wouldn't do
No. I'm saying I would explicitly copy the full text of whatever column 3 is, even if it was ridiculously long. I would say order by, and I would have that whole thing there. But if I'm just doing some data exploration and it's code that's never going to get run again, if it's a lot of characters, then I might just say sort by 3.
Okay.
Just to save some typing or save some copying and pasting.
Okay.
But I don't ever use that in production code. I would always explicitly repeat whatever the expression is. And then the sorting will never change, again, even if you change the order on things. So another comment is that you can't change the syntax between what you put in select list and what you sort by. So we haven't gotten to it yet, but you can return more than just columns. You can actually have expressions. So you can actually say, give me column number 1, which is the price, and then column number 2, which is the tax. And I want you to add them together for me, or whatever, right? So then you would say, price plus tax. And SQL Server will do that for you. But if you want to sort by that particular column, then you have to repeat it again. You have to say price plus tax. And so there are places in SQL Server where it gets a little bit annoying just repeating that stuff over and over and over again. But that's just the way SQL is. Let's see here. All right. So then I have one other general comment, and I may end up repeating this later as we get into more complex queries. Most of the time people don't teach distinct so early on, but we're lucky we kind of get this right off the bat in the first technical chapter. One of the things that is sort of inevitable is at some point you're going to write a query and you're going to say, I'm expecting to get 1 row back per whatever. I'm going to get 1 row back per customer. And for some reason, you're going to see repeated rows. You're like, well, that's weird. I have 2 Teds, and I have 2 Jameses, and I have 2 Ryans. So one of the things I always tell beginners is, do not just stick the word distinct in there to get rid of the duplicates, but rather figure out why you're getting duplicates when you weren't expecting them. Because if it's not doing what you expected, it might also be doing something else that you're not expecting. And I've just seen that multiple times where, you know, so I thought I would just mention it because that's a relatively common thing where people are like, well, I didn't know why I was doing that, so I added distinct. The only time you should use distinct is when you explicitly know that there are multiple rows for something and you're just interested in the unique values. So, if you want a list of all the people who bought something from your store today, some people bought more than one thing. They had multiple orders. And so you just say, well, it doesn't matter that there were 100 orders. I just want the 90 people who, had any of the orders. Then you would say, select the distinct people, blah, 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 blah. But otherwise, you should never use distinct to like fix a query that's not working. All right, any other comments, questions? All right, I think that we're starting off with the basics. This is pretty approachable stuff. But I do recommend, for the people who say like, well, I've even played with SQL before, I want to like get really comfortable. It's probably not good enough to just read this stuff. At some point, you have to actually play around. So last week I showed one way where if you want from a Jupyter notebook, you can run queries against the sample data. Appendix A of the book has also ways to load sample data in other systems. So if you at work, at school, at whatever, have access to Postgres, have access to Oracle, you can practice these queries. This chapter is pretty straightforward, but let me just there like I mentioned last time, there's gazillions of resources. But here's one. So SQL Bolt, their very first lesson introduces select queries. And so if you want to practice, that's a page, doesn't have any ads. You can go there, and the practice tables are not going to match this book exactly, but they have some small tables that you can practice. And it's right there on the web page. You can just type the command and hit run. You don't have to install anything. It'll just run against whatever database they have built into the web page. So again, in future weeks, I think it'll be more interesting, more important to practice. But so I just thought I would kind of make the habit of showing you guys some places where if you want a little bit of repetition, for me, I know it helps. Like if I actually type a command and run it, it sticks in my memory better than just reading in a book. All right, well, we don't have to extend this if unnecessarily, if people have gotten the value of this. So next week, Ian is up. Ian, thank you for volunteering. And so this was chapters 2 and 3. So next week is going to be chapters 4 and 5. And that's going to be filtering 2 levels. So basic and more advanced filtering. So what if I don't want all the rows in my table to come back? How do I do that? All right, so Ryan, maybe we can end the recording here.